"You're under arrest. Enough of the act." The words sliced through the hum of morning outside the courthouse, too loud, too harsh for the quiet dignity of the man they were aimed at. Officer Richard Morris's voice shook slightly, not with doubt, but with the raw edge of fatigue, the kind born of too much coffee and too little rest. His eyes were sharp with suspicion, narrowed against the sunlight that glinted off the building's stone facade. Henry Carlson stood still near the steps, the weight of 75 years resting in his lined face, but not in his posture. The Vietnam veteran cap he wore sat square upon his head, its fabric faded but clean, the embroidered insignia a quiet reminder of where he had been. In one hand, he held a folder of papers, neat, organized, ready for the appointment he had come for. His other hand had lifted slightly in protest, palm outward, fingers steady, as if to halt what was unfolding before him. Morris moved fast, his grip rough as he seized Henry's arm, twisting it behind his back with the practiced motion of a man too used to acting first and thinking later. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked shut around Henry's wrists, the sound sharp, final, echoing against the courthouse walls. The officer's breath smelled faintly of stale coffee, his uniform creased as if he had slept in it, his eyes rimmed red with sleepless nights, and too much ambition spent on the wrong pursuits. Henry did not struggle. He did not raise his voice. He stood, cuffed now, with the quiet strength that comes not from defiance, but from having faced far greater trials than this. His voice, when it came, was steady, low, but carrying in the sudden hush that had fallen over the street. "I wore this for real," he said, a slight tilt of his head toward his cap. "So you could wear that badge." People paused. The steps of passers-by slowed, heads turned. A woman froze with her keys in hand beside a parked car. A man lowered his coffee cup, forgotten in his grip. The city's hum softened for a moment, as if the world itself drew breath to listen. And somewhere in the distance, unnoticed for now, the sound of boots on pavement drew nearer, a quiet promise that honor would not stand unseen. The morning had begun, as so many did for Henry Carlson, with the soft gray light of dawn filtering through the slats of his blinds. The small apartment was still, save for the creak of the floorboards beneath his steady steps. On the wall beside the front door hung a framed photograph, a much younger Henry in uniform, his face sun-browned, his eyes alert and serious beneath the weight of his helmet. Beside him, the men of his unit, some grinning, some sober, all bound together by the kind of bond that few outside the service could ever understand. Henry moved through his modest space with the precision of long habit. He brewed a single cup of coffee, its aroma filling the room, the familiar warmth grounding him as it always did. The small table beside his armchair held a folder, neatly prepared the night before, containing the paperwork he would need for his appointment at the courthouse. He glanced at it now, satisfied, before turning his attention to the cap that rested on a hook near the door, the same cap he had worn to ceremonies, parades, and quiet visits to the graves of friends long gone. He lifted it with care, brushing a thumb along the faded stitching. Outside, the morning was bright and clear, the air fresh with the scent of cut grass and distant blossoms from city planters. Henry set out on foot as he preferred, his pace measured but steady. The park lay between his home and the courthouse, and as was his habit, he passed through it, taking the familiar path that wound beneath old oaks and maples. The leaves whispered in the breeze, and the rhythmic sound of his shoes on the paved trail blended with the birdsong and the faint rustle of squirrels foraging in the underbrush. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby playground, the easy, unself-conscious joy of the young. Henry offered a nod to a woman seated on a bench, who returned it with a polite smile. To another man passing in the opposite direction, he raised a hand in quiet greeting. These small connections, unspoken but understood, were part of the rhythm of his days. His mind drifted as he walked, not in distraction, but in reflection. He thought of his unit, of the long-ago day when they had faced the river crossing that might have ended them all. The memory came unbidden, vivid as ever. The roar of enemy fire, the sting of sweat in his eyes, the mud that clung to boots and weighed them down. His men had looked to him then, their faces pale but determined, trusting him to lead. And he had led. Every drill, every hard-won skill put to the test, his commands clear and sure, even as the chaos of battle closed in around them. They had crossed, and they had lived, because preparation had met the moment. Henry shook the memory free with a slow breath, returning to the present as the courthouse came into view. The building rose before him, solid and unremarkable, its stone warmed by the morning sun. People moved in and out of its doors, some purposeful, some lost in thought. Henry climbed the steps, the folder tucked beneath his arm, his cap square on his head. He found a place to stand, out of the way, waiting for his turn, the same as any other citizen. The sound of distant traffic mingled with the soft murmur of voices nearby. The air smelled faintly of warm stone and exhaust. His eyes scanned the entryway, calm, patient. And then came the footsteps, quick, heavy, the sound of urgency born not of duty, but of haste and strain. The moment he had not foreseen was upon him, and the dignity of his morning would soon meet the rough edge of another's error. The click of the handcuffs echoed sharper than it should have against the stone of the courthouse steps. The sound seemed to pierce through the hum of the city, turning heads, silencing conversations. Henry Carlson stood still beneath the officer's grip, the cold bite of the cuffs a stinging reminder that not all wounds are visible. His hands, weathered by time and service, rested now behind his back, restrained not by guilt, but by a terrible misunderstanding fueled by haste. Officer Richard Morris's breath came quick, his jaw tight, his fingers white where they clenched the chain of the cuffs. The scent of stale coffee clung to him, his uniform rumpled, as if the long hours and sleepless nights had seeped into its fabric. His eyes were rimmed red, his focus sharp but clouded. A man stretched thin by his own choices. Too many late nights over books and study guides, too many cups of bitter coffee chasing the dream of advancement until judgment had given way to reflex. The scene froze for a heartbeat, and in that stillness the weight of the moment began to press upon those who saw it. A woman at the edge of the steps lowered her phone mid-text, her brow furrowing as she took in the sight of the older man in the veteran's cap, standing dignified despite the indignity forced upon him. A man with a briefcase paused, his eyes darting from Henry to the officer, confusion and unease mingling on his face. The murmur of voices rose, tentative, uncertain. Henry's gaze swept the crowd, his expression calm, though beneath the surface a deep sadness stirred, not for himself, but for the world that could not see clearly before it acted. His voice, when it came, was soft, but carried in the charged silence. I stood for others once. Seems today I stand alone. Morris did not answer, his mind racing, fueled by exhaustion, by the single narrative he had clung to, that this was the imposter he had been warned about, the fraud who had shamed the uniform. He could not see in that moment the truth plain before him, could not hear the quiet dignity in Henry's words over the drum of his own heartbeat. A young man near the courthouse doors took a step forward. His eyes caught the cap, the posture, the quiet grace with which Henry endured. He recognized him, from ceremonies, from photographs, from the stories told at the Veterans Hall. His hand slipped to his phone. A few quick taps sent a message. It's Mr. Henry. He is being wrongly arrested. The bystanders' murmurs grew. Some filmed, uncertain what they were seeing but knowing instinctively that it mattered. A child clutched at his mother's hand, whispering, "Why is the grandpa in trouble?" The mother shook her head, unable to answer. The city's hum returned in fragments. The rumble of a bus, the bark of a dog, the distant wail of a siren. But the heart of the street had stilled, waiting, watching. And far off, the sound of boots approached, the promise of a truth that would not remain hidden long. The sound of boots striking pavement came first, steady and measured, not rushed, but with purpose that needed no voice. The small group of Marines emerged from the edge of the square, their figures sharp against the morning light. Their uniforms were crisp, their faces set with the solemnity of men who knew they had been called not for battle, but for something equally sacred, to stand for one of their own. Henry Carlson lifted his head as they drew near, the clink of the handcuffs loud in his ears, louder still against the quiet respect that seemed to fall over the street at the sight of the approaching Marines. The officer's grip on his arm faltered, confusion flickering across his face as the meaning of this unexpected arrival began to dawn. The Marines came to the foot of the courthouse steps and, as one, dropped to a knee. The motion was slow, deliberate, as if time itself had been asked to pause and bear witness. Their heads bowed, their hands resting lightly on their thighs. Their posture spoke louder than words, of respect, of recognition, of a debt understood and willingly honored. A senior Marine rose from his place in the line, stepping forward with the steady grace of a man who had seen the cost of service and carried its weight gladly. His gaze met Morris's, calm but unyielding, the quiet strength of truth shining through. "That man earned your respect long before you put on that uniform," the Marine said, his voice low but clear, carrying to every ear along the street. "We know him. He's no imposter." The words fell into the silence like a stone into still water, the ripples of their meaning spreading outward, touching every onlooker, every heart that had held doubt. The crowd stilled, then softened, shoulders lowered, brows unknotted, eyes lowered in quiet shame. Henry stood unmoving, the weight of the handcuffs forgotten for a moment, his heart lifted by the sight of those who had come, not because they had been commanded, but because they chose to honor what was right. The officer hesitated, his hand still on Henry's arm, his breath shallow, his heart pounding with a confusion that no longer felt righteous. His eyes darted to the Marines, kneeling without demand, without force, their quiet unity more powerful than any order he might give. Doubt crept in, sharp, unwelcome. Morris swallowed hard, his fingers twitching as he reached into his pocket, drawing out the worn, creased photo of the man he'd been hunting all morning. The suspect's face stared back at him from the print. Similar in build, yes. Older, bearded, the same kind of cap shading his eyes. But now, looking between the photo and the man before him, the truth broke through the haze of fatigue and pride. It wasn't Henry. The details no longer blurred, the lines of the face, the set of the mouth, the clear gaze that met his own with neither anger nor fear, but steady strength. The rush of certainty that had driven his hands now turned to the sick weight of mistake, of harm done where none was deserved. Morris's grip loosened, his shoulders slumping as the reality of what he had done sank deep. His free hand brushed the handcuff key at his belt, the metal suddenly heavy, as if asking him whether he would act at last with the respect he owed. The officer's hands trembled as he found the key, the metal cold against his fingers as he fumbled to free Henry's wrists. The click of the cuffs releasing was soft, but it seemed to ring louder than the harsh command that had begun it all. And as the last restraint fell away, Henry adjusted his cap with slow dignity, his eyes meeting the Marines with silent gratitude. The city seemed to breathe again, the moment of reckoning complete, but the lesson only just begun. The key turned in the lock with a soft, almost reluctant click. The sound carried across the hush that had fallen over the street, as final in its way as the sharp command that had begun it all. The cuffs fell away, the metal cold as it touched Morris's hand, heavier now with the weight of what they had meant in that brief but searing moment. Henry Carlson stood still, his hands freed, but he did not move to rub his wrists or to glare at the man who had bound them. Instead, he reached up, slow and steady, and adjusted his cap, the simple, dignified gesture of a man reclaiming what had never truly been taken from him. His eyes met those of the Marines, still kneeling at the foot of the steps, and in that glance passed a silent exchange of thanks, of understanding that needed no words. For a long breath, no one in the crowd spoke. The air itself seemed to hold the memory of the injustice and the grace that had answered it. Then, from somewhere near the edge of the gathered onlookers, a single pair of hands came together. Once, then again. The sound of the clapping was soft, not the thunder of celebration, but the steady, reverent rhythm of recognition. Another joined, and then another, until the street filled with the quiet applause of a town reminded of its duty to honor. Faces showed tears not of sorrow, but of release, the kind that comes when shame gives way to what is right. A mother lifted her child into her arms, whispering an explanation too soft for any but them to hear. An old man at the edge of the crowd removed his own cap, holding it over his heart as his gaze stayed fixed on Henry. Morris stood frozen for a moment, the photo of the suspect still clutched in his hand, his eyes on Henry's face as if seeing him for the first time. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. The moment for apology was there, hanging between them, but his shame held him silent. The Marines rose as one, their knees creaking, their boots firm on the pavement once more. They formed a line, not of challenge, but of respect, their heads held high as they bore witness to the dignity restored before them. Henry took a slow step forward, then another, passing through the line they had made for him, his presence quiet but unshaken. The applause followed him, soft as a breeze, warm as the morning sun that bathed the courthouse in light. The days that followed carried the memory of that morning like a hush over the town. People spoke of it in low voices at the cafe, on porch steps, in line at the grocer's. Not with anger or gossip, but with the quiet reverence that comes when a community knows it has witnessed something that asked more of it. The sight of the Marines kneeling, the sound of that soft applause, the look on Henry Carlson's face as he reclaimed his dignity, these things lingered, etched into the rhythm of daily life. At the police department, the reckoning began. The incident could not be ignored. Not after the videos, not after the witness accounts, not after the ripple of shame and resolve that had spread through the streets. The chief stood before the press, before the community, and offered the words that should have come sooner. A formal, public apology to Henry Carlson. The statement was clear, direct, a recognition of the harm done and of the debt now owed. Alongside the apology came the announcement of change. The department, in partnership with local veterans and military families, launched a new training initiative, one designed not just to prevent another such mistake, but to build a deeper understanding of the men and women who had served and of the honor their service deserved. Meetings were held, voices were heard, and plans were put into place that would outlast the moment. As for Officer Richard Morris, the weight of what had passed settled heavily upon him. The reprimand came as expected, formal, recorded, a mark on his record that would follow him. But deeper than that was the mark left on his conscience. He carried it in the quiet moments, in the long nights when sleep would not come, in the memory of the cuffs, the trembling of his own hands as he had unlocked them, the eyes of the man he had wronged. His routine changed. The late nights over textbooks gave way to earlier hours, to rest, to reflection. He walked to work more often, his pace slower, his gaze lifted to meet those he passed. The lesson had been hard, but it had taken root, not in words, but in the silent resolve to be better, to see more clearly, to act with the respect he had once forgotten. And through it all, Henry Carlson asked for nothing, demanded nothing. His dignity had spoken for him. The change was its own reward. The city returned to its rhythm in the days that followed. But for those who had seen what unfolded on the courthouse steps, something had shifted. There was a softness in greetings now, a longer pause in handshakes, a deeper glance that spoke of recognition where once there had been only habit. The world had not changed overnight, but in one corner of it, respect had found firmer ground. Henry Carlson walked the familiar path through the park at dusk, the sky painted in soft hues of gold and violet. His steps were steady, his shoulders square, the Marine cap resting upon his head, casting a gentle shadow over his face. The air was cool, carrying the scent of the earth warming beneath the last light of day. The hum of the city softened at this hour, as if it too paused to breathe and remember. He passed beneath the old trees that lined the trail, their leaves whispering in the breeze. The bench where he sometimes paused stood empty, but he did not stop. There was no need. His peace was not in rest, but in the quiet rhythm of his walk. in the knowledge that what needed to be seen had been seen, that what needed to be taught had been taught without a single raised voice or harsh word. The path curved gently, leading him toward home, the lights of the street lamps beginning to flicker on, casting pools of gold upon the pavement. A child's laughter rang out faintly in the distance, mingling with the soft chirp of crickets. Henry tipped his cap slightly to a passerby who offered a nod, the small, shared acknowledgement of neighbors who might never speak, but who understood. As he walked, the weight he had carried, of memory, of injustice, of the moment that had tested him, seemed to lift with each step, leaving only the quiet strength of a man who had kept faith with himself and with those who came before and after him. The sun dipped below the horizon, and with it, the day that had begun in conflict found its close in peace. Henry Carlson's steps faded into the soft hum of evening, but the memory of what had been witnessed remained. A reminder that honor does not ask for recognition, but is owed it all the same. His quiet strength had spoken louder than anger ever could, and those who had seen would not forget. Today, we remember. Always forward. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.